Creatives like artists, writers, photographers, they've gotten the raw end of the deal when it comes to the generative AI movement. People have trained the current generation of these AI models by downloading everything they can find on the internet, largely ignoring who it belongs to. And a team of computer scientists at the University of Chicago has built tools to fight back that disrupt and even poison the ways these generative AI models work. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in 2 U.S. cities.
As the disk rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte pepsicle. I present to you Electro, the Mono Man.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
This episode, it's the latest installment of our oral history project.
What we do is really try to figure out ways to use machine learning to actually build tools that in some ways disrupt other machine learning tools, but primarily act as a shield, as a way to protect human creatives. My name is Zhao. I'm a professor of computer science at University of Chicago, and I've been a professor for 20 years, mostly specializing in security. And for the last quite a number of years, I've been working in security and privacy issues related to artificial intelligence or machine learning. You know, we've known for decades, ever since the internet really become commercialized, that the internet is meant to be widely open and sort of freely accessible. Accessibility was a big tenet of the initial internet architecture. However, that's always been a challenge for copyright and protecting copyright. So in the early 2000s, we had, for example, waves of music piracy and piracy of movies, digital movies, and lots of lawsuits came, companies got sued out of existence, and people learned that, even content on the internet should be respected with respect to copyright. Somehow the current generation of AI training model companies never got that memo. So what they are doing, and they have been doing ever since this wave of AI models started, they have been literally downloading everything they can find on the internet. That includes graphics, images, audio, text, anything that they can find, they've been taking and trying to feed it into their AI training models, AI models for training. And that's deeply problematic for a number of reasons. A lot of these images are intensely private. There are hospital photos, there are pictures of children, there is adult images, personal private images online, things that people never expected to be downloaded en masse and then used to train an AI model. And of course, there's even worse images, terrorism images, child abuse images, those kind of things. And those are also getting fed into these AI models. So this entire generation of generative AI models is largely trained on things without any regard to copyright. And that means it's got lots of issues. These tools are able to regurgitate copyrighted text, copyrighted lyrics, and these image generators are able to generate all sorts of things, many times, oftentimes very closely or intentionally mimicking the art styles of individual living artists who really should have ownership of their own work, but whose styles are being copied and used without authorization, certainly, and of course, without compensation of any sort. Glaze is a specific tool that disrupts image-based fine-tuning, which is to say that there are many people who go out there and find samples from individual human artists, and they use a open source model like Stable Diffusion, fine-tune it on those samples, and in doing so, they generate a model that is then able to, roughly speaking, replicate or replace the human artist, albeit with lower quality, but sufficiently enough that, the artist really loses revenue and feels a lot of mental distress. It's like someone else wearing your skill and your expertise and your experience from multiple decades, like a skin that they can put on or take off without your permission. So Glaze disrupts that process. The other tool is Nightshade, Nightshade is much more sort of general and widespread applicable tool. Nightshade is a tool that, in very high level terms, adds teeth to copyright enforcement from a technical level. Basically, what it is that you can think of it like a tiny little piece of poison pill that can be applied and added, integrated into existing images, pieces of art, photography, those kind of things. And, if a model trains on a small number of these samples, it's not a big deal. But if they train on a sufficiently large number of these samples, then what they do is they get a very distorted view of what they're trying to learn about concepts and what visual features are associated with concepts. So we can convince, for example, a text-to-image model that a dog has long whiskers or that a cow has 4 tires and a fender, those kind of things. And that obviously has disruptive effects. Both of these tools act in such a way that they are, generally speaking, nearly invisible to the human eye when you apply it to an existing image. So what you see is basically the original image. However, AI models that try to learn from them see something entirely different. And that's the whole point, is that, it is meant to not negatively affect images or art or creations, but if it's being trained without permission and authorization, then the negative impact will come into play and disrupt the AI training process. Before Nightshade came about, it is important to note that there was literally no real defense against AI and AI training. That is to say, if you are a gaming studio, if you are an individual or a company artist, if you are a movie studio, it didn't matter. If you had intellectual property on the internet, chances are it was already scraped, and chances are it will continue to be scraped, and anything that you produce that is new and interesting and your copyright will be sucked into a model for training. So what can you do? I mean, companies can, send out cease and desist letters. Individuals can fill out opt-out forms where there are some, and there are very few. But the problem is with all these techniques or all these potential tools is that none of them are actually enforceable. And that is to say that, if you sign up for an opt-out list, if someone answers your cease and desist letter and says, yes, we have stopped training on your content, there's absolutely no way to verify that. We do not have the techniques. And I work in the space, obviously, as for my research, but there are no reliable techniques today that will take a large model, generative model, and reliably tell you whether a particular single sample was trained into that model or not. So without that information, without that ability to reliably detect whether something was used in the training data, all these techniques are basically optional. A company can turn around and say, yes, we will opt you out. Yes, I've stopped training on your data. But in essence, they can continue to do so. And there's no way that you can prove that they're wrong. So there's no enforcement. There's no validation of any sort. And that's the fundamental problem today, is that there is this gross imbalance in the power dynamic between content creators and owners and these AI training companies. So what Nightshade does is basically it says, we don't necessarily have to trust you, whether you said you've opted out or whether you've stopped training on a particular set of data. It will be embedded in the data itself. And for those companies who go ahead and violate copyright, violate cease and desist, violate opt out or whatever, they will continue to train on this data. And even after not so much of this type of nightshaded data, the poison effects will start to affect the model. Cumulatively speaking, it at minimum will disrupt individual prompts. It will make the model output things that look like cars when you ask for a cow, or at least some sort of weird hybrid monster that nobody really wants to see. And there are stronger effects down the road. So that's what Nightshade does. It acts as an enforcement of copyright, if you will. Larger companies have some regulatory pressure. They have some reputational risk when it comes to, being told by Senate, being told by, regulatory authorities that they need to obey opt-out or they need to respect copyright. But there are lots and lots of smaller companies who have absolutely no qualm because they don't have the reputational risk. And so they can go, behind everyone else and train on whatever they like, and no one will be the wiser. So Nightshade is designed for all these different scenarios and meant to protect individual creators so that they can feel better about how their content can be created and can avoid scraping. The response was overwhelming. I think something like Glaze, which was meant to protect individual artists, it was already overwhelming because there had been nothing in the space, a technical tool to actually help artists. So that was already huge. But then when Nightshade came around, the response was just overwhelming, is the only thing I can say. I mean, we had 250,000 downloads in the first 5 days, and it literally flooded our network in a sort of good way, if you will. It was not a network attack of any sort. It was just there were so many requests that our department network literally could not handle the traffic. And so people were complaining on Twitter about the fact that this download was estimated to take something like 9 to 10 hours. And that's insane. So we had to basically, pay thousands of dollars to put additional replicas on other cloud servers to try to alleviate the demand from all these users. So yeah, the response has been absolutely tremendous. There's so much pent-up frustration and anger from all sorts of creators about how they've been treated by tech companies and how this lack of consent, this ignoring or disregard for copyright and ownership has been a core tenet of how these AI models work. So a lot of people were and are, I think, using Nightshade to apply it even to sort of normal images that are not necessarily art. People are adding it to their own personal photos and so on, just because they want to make sure that unauthorized scraping really needs to stop. In terms of other stakeholders, talked to the Copyright Office a number of times, talked to multiple state legislatures about this. Everyone has been overwhelmingly supportive of these kind of techniques. Business schools and even foreign ministers from countries in Europe, there's been a lot of support. I think when it comes to the tech companies and AI model trainers themselves, there's not been very much feedback, not surprisingly. I think it's probably ill-advised for them to engage me directly or to disparage these projects. But let's say that long-term friends in the tech industry who are a little bit less friendly towards me these days. But that, again, I think is to be expected and probably a small price to pay for the type of things that we're doing. I think it's important to dispel some incorrect assumptions about sort of the state of AI and also about human creativity. So there's a few things. One, generative AI does not actually learn. It is not creative. Those of us who actually work on these tools, we know that, for example, LLMs are just token predictors. They are guessing at what the highest probability next word should be when you ask a particular question. They're very good at it, but they're still just guessing machines. And that is fundamentally why we have hallucinations, why hallucinations are incredibly hard to get rid of, because they are part of the architecture. They are part and parcel to the design of these systems. Similarly, with diffusion networks, these image generators do not really understand what impressionism is. All they know is that they've seen lots of samples with particular visual features that have been labeled impressionism. And so when you say, I want a cat in a spacesuit in the style of impressionism or in the style of a particular named artist, it will apply some of those techniques. So, we are not going to be able to rely on these tools for creativity to replace human creativity. That will never happen, particularly because humans are the judges and arbiters of what is good, whether it's music or a particular new type of art or a particular new style of writing. It's up for us to judge whether something is notably good or appreciably good, and AI will always be playing catch up. And of course, right now, AI is disrupting all these creative industries where they are trying to replace humans. And that has a downstream effect where aspiring artists who are musicians or artists or writers are literally quitting their careers before they even start. And so we're going to have this extreme damage on an entire generation of human creatives across so many different industries. And when that actually comes to fruition, these AI models will be stuck as well, because there will be no more good content from them to train on. They'll still have Twitter and the mess that is social media, but that's the kind of training that we're going to feed into these models now, not professional writers or journalists, because those will have quit the job and left the industry. It's also important to note that so many of the people who are being affected today in these creative industries they don't fall into this misconception of rich, snooty artists who sit in the galleries with a glass of wine, right? Counting in the big dollars that they're bringing in for these massive sales of paintings, millions of dollars and whatnot. That's not reality. The reality is that there are hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of artists worldwide who are just literally working class artists. They are the ones providing the basic ideas for all the blockbuster movies. They are the ones putting forth the concepts and what visual cues look like every time we see a big movie, and not even the fantasy and sci-fi, but sometimes very basic movies or traditional drama movies or period pieces, all these things. And to lose that type of human creativity because folks like these artists can no longer pay rent because their jobs are diminishing and getting replaced by really, poor mimics of their style, poor generators of images. That's really disheartening. And I think a lot of real people, working class people, are getting hurt by this. And it's not this idea of, I think sometimes in Silicon Valley, everyone thinks if I can make something faster, it is always a win. And that's not true here, because artists are not in this to do this for speed. It's not about how many images can you generate. Artists are in these industries because this is their passion, and they are, foregoing other more lucrative careers so that they can pursue their passion. We should be having AI do the kind of jobs that we don't want, not take away the jobs that people really want to do.
This episode was produced by me and Emma Silikins and mixed by Garrett Lang, with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.
From PRX.